Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of KN Talks. I'm John, and today I'm delighted to be talking to Natalie Grumhaus and Phil Williams from Tri-Merit. Tri-Merit are a US-based specialty tax firm of accountants, and in particular have a specialism in R&D tax credits. Natalie and Phil, thanks for speaking to us today. Perhaps you can just tell us a little bit about yourselves and about Tri-Merit.
Thanks, John, and thanks a lot for having us on. Really excited to be here with you today. So to introduce Tri-Merit, we are a full-service specialty engineering tax firm. So basically think of any tax incentive that a company may want to go after that involves the hard sciences. So research and development, fixed assets, energy. We have staff that can step in, augment your CPA firm and assist you with going after those incentives. So the company's been around for about 15 years. We were originally, actually it's about 17 years now, originally founded in Chicago. We have a nationwide presence and work with a handful of international companies as well. So I'm an attorney by background, work in operations leadership for the company, but have the opportunity to get involved in all the incentives that I talked about before, including the back-end audit defense, which is something that Natalie is also very much involved in. So Natalie, why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm Natalie Grumhaus. I am the Director of Audit and Compliance with Tri-Merit. So I work primarily with the audit defense team, as Phil mentioned. And that is one of the other great things that Tri-Merit does, is provide audit defense as an included service with all of our engagements. It's sort of unusual for a specialty tax company to provide this service at no additional cost to the taxpayer. And we work directly with you in the IRS through any tax investigations or audits at both the state and the federal level up to appeals.
Amazing. That sounds like a really useful addition to the Tri-Merit service. So today we're going to talk a little bit about R&D tax credits in the US. So perhaps you can open with just a quick explanation of what that is and what kind of tax advantages it might then generate for businesses.
All right. So the R&D tax credit at the federal level. So people always want to know, what are the dollars that are involved? So what it is, it's a 20% credit on the amount that you spend, but that 20% is over a base amount. So basically what it ends up being is a credit that you actually realize somewhere between, in most cases, between 6 and 12% of the amount that you spend on qualified experimental and research activities.
And so that's a credit against the federal tax, and then presumably states will have their own separate regimes for state tax as well.
You know, it's interesting that you mentioned that, John, because yeah, there's the federal credit, and actually there's some states that have incentives larger than the federal credit. So if you look at some states like Arizona, if you look at the state of Rhode Island, if you look at California, Arizona and Rhode Island are actually both larger than the federal business. Arizona, it's actually refundable as well. Rhode Island also larger than the federal, California getting up close to the size of the federal benefits. So there are some real dollars in play with these credits.
Excellent. So people will need to do some thinking if they're looking to move to the US as to what state's best to make sure they maximize the benefits of this in the context of.
And not to put the cart in front of the horse, but there is quite a bit of that site selection going on, both the state and local level with incentives.
Excellent. Really interesting. So in terms of eligibility requirements, presumably you can't just call anything R&D tax credits or research and development. So what are the rules around applying for this?
So the rules around the R&D credit, you start out with the federal tax code, and then that's interpreted through Treasury regulations, that's interpreted through the courts. So it's a combination of all three of those things. Basically what it comes down to is the activities that are included, and that can be salaries and wages of employees that are working on research and development, that can be prototype supplies, that can be third-party contractors, that can be, in the case of software development, hosting expenses. Those expenses are all aggregated, but basically they all need to relate to an activity that relates to the elimination of technical uncertainty. So what does that mean? It means that when you're in a project and you come up with a hypothesis for how you're going to solve whatever the problem is, the time which is spent experimenting with alternatives until you get to that end result, all the expenses that take place during that time frame are your qualified development expenses that translate into what are commonly called QREs, or qualified research expenses.
Okay, so presumably you need to have some kind of plan documented at the start to say this is where we're trying to get to. And then it might be things like, as you say, prototype development, or I guess coding time and that kind of thing you might be looking to claim.
Yes, exactly. And that's actually one of the things that has been making the R&D tax credit more complicated lately is, as Phil mentioned, the tax credit is interpreted through both Treasury regulations and court cases. And recently a court case came out, Meyer, Borgman, Johnson, which asks the taxpayers to submit what they call specific barometers of success. And essentially what they're looking for are those written out specific goals that the taxpayer has to meet in order to be successful in research. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be successful in the research you do. It just means that you have to have those goals that in theory you could fail if you do not accomplish the research correctly or in the way that the client wants.
That's interesting. So that must be quite difficult sometimes. So for example, if you're doing some kind of software development, obviously it can be quite difficult to say exactly how things are going to work, even if you have a sense of what it's supposed to do. So how detailed does that need to be? Can it be quite high level, or does it need to be very specific?
You want to get as much detail as you can. But oftentimes, even with something like software, what Natalie just described, if you were to go back to the original specifications and requirements for what needed to be developed, it's going to be a fairly exhaustive list of, here is what we want the end state of this software to look like. Going through all those iterations in the middle is what we're looking at. So software is actually usually on the easier side because they document everything. Where it's more challenging oftentimes is on the startup side, where they go, hey, we've got this pie in the sky idea. We want to get from doing it in our garage to doing it at production scale. And then the people that are doing that, their minds are in the business and their minds are on accomplishing their successful, doing it right. Their mind isn't necessarily to, hey, did I track that 15 minutes of time that I just spent working on those drawings? So that's where we're trying to come up with a good solution there in the middle to document that as best we can.
That's really interesting. And in terms of sectors, I mean, we've talked a little bit about things like software, which is obvious for research and development, and there'll be things like, biosciences, that kind of thing, which are quite obvious. But can it go a little bit further than that? Because as we talk about the development process, I'm thinking we have a lot of food startup businesses in the UK. And there's a lot of recipe development that goes in to move from your kind of sauce that you make in your kitchen and sell to your friends or at the local farmers market through to kind of proper production level stuff. Can you stretch into those kind of areas as well, or is it really quite just technical areas where the tax credit applies?
Well, that is an interesting point that you bring up, John. So recently, Great Britain did expand its R&D credit to allow for a more expansive approach to research, to include social sciences, arts, economics, things like that. In the US, it is still solely scientific and technical. So for instance, those recipe startups that you mentioned, now if they're doing purely a scientific or technical approach to something, and that something is a technical problem, so like, you need an oven that gets to an exact certain temperature to create the exact rise and fall with a certain amount of humidity, and you need to develop that oven, then that might qualify. The R&D credit is not based on who the company is, it's based on what they're doing. Unfortunately, anything in the US R&D credit that would fall under social sciences, economics, arts, music, anything that isn't scientific or technical isn't going to be eligible from the get-go.
Okay, that's really interesting and a little bit different from how it sometimes works for R&D tax credit in the UK, which can be a bit more expansive, but has been abused. So it's being narrowed down a little bit these days. You alluded before to the new case law that's just came in recently. Have you guys had to make any changes to your approach and the way you deal with things for clients as a result of that case law?
Absolutely. So with the Meyer, Borgman, Johnson case that I mentioned, that has changed how we approach looking at the contracts that our clients bring us, that they've entered into with their own clients that cover these research projects. Now we're doing more of a two-prong approach where we're looking for those specific barometers of success first. And then we go in with the second prong and determine if there's economic risk, which is a major factor in R&D. And now we're sort of looking at that economic risk and the specific barometers of success as sort of a, can they fail this project? And if so, what would they fail? And if they failed it, would the money that they have been paid or the funds that have been invested in the project, would they be at risk of losing those funds? And so that is absolutely a major change that we've made to our processes this summer, actually, with the filing deadlines this fall. And it has been tough with some of the clients because some of them haven't been able to find the specific barometers of success to kind of satisfy that first prong, because unfortunately in that case, they stated specifically that adhering to state and local codes and building codes isn't sufficient. Now, granted, we disagree with that because those state and local and building codes are often very complicated and require a lot of R&D to figure out how exactly to meet them while still meeting the client expectations. But that's part of what we do is we have to take what we're given with the law and the regulations and figure out how to, help the clients still get a tax credit on that.
It's interesting. And then you alluded to your role in the audit process, Natalie, if there is an issue later on. So could you tell me a little bit about that and how it works?
Sure, absolutely. So once we submit the paperwork, we are or the paperwork for the tax credit, we are sort of off the hook a little bit. We just kind of sit back and wait for the client to reach out to us if they have an issue. That's part of our engagement, is they let us know if something goes wrong. So in theory, they could hire their own audit team if they wanted. I don't know why they would. We're great at what we do. But they will reach out to us. They'll send us any letters that the IRS has sent them or state tax investigations. And then we will take over from there and handle communications with the IRS. We'll get a power of attorney in place so that we can represent them. And then we will go with them through the entire process, whatever it takes.
Presumably, it's really important to make sure that you have a team who absolutely know what they're doing, because it sounds like this is really quite a technical area of US tax law, and it would be very easy to make a mistake in the appeals process and find yourself in real trouble.
That's absolutely right, and that honestly is why I love TriMerit so much, is because it's a very cooperative environment. I do work in just the audit department, right? That's my department. But I talk with people in our R&D sectors, our energy sectors, our employee retention credit sectors, and work with them while I'm handling the audit, so that no man is an island. We're all one big team. We all work together. And that's why we are able to handle audits so well for our clients, is we don't just have one audit team off doing their own thing, working on audits. We're all working together to make sure that our clients first get the credits and then keep the credits if the IRS investigates them.
And I'll chime in just real quick there, John. I think that's one of the things that one of the privileges that we have over the CPA. A company's CPA has, whatever it is, an 80,000 page tax code that they're filing. We're able to concentrate on like 4 of those pages. So that allows you to issue spot when a case like Natalie was just talking through, we're able to issue spot and hop on that pretty quickly and get clients aligned. Whereas, and not to fault them, I was just speaking with somebody from the Big Four a couple of years ago. We have a client in common. That case has been around for 6 months now, and they had no idea what we were talking about. So, just being able to issue spot and stay on the leading edge of information like that is important.
Wow, it's amazing that the Big Four were that far behind the curve, but a good job for their clients. They were talking to you. That's great. I think that's a really useful kind of quick introduction to US tax credits. If anybody listening to this is thinking about doing any R&D in the US, then please do reach out to Phil and Natalie. TriMerit are a great organisation all over this area, and we'll be able to help you with all of your needs, plus those additional areas if things like employee credit are something that you need support with as well. Thanks again, Phil, Natalie, for taking the time to talk to me. I really appreciate it. And just to say, if you are watching this and would like to see more of the content we produce, please do subscribe to our YouTube channel and keep an eye on our website, because we do try to put everything up there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.